If you think you have seen everything this trade war has to offer, if you think you know how far Mark Carney is willing to go to push back against Donald Trump, then buckle up right now, because what just happened in Oslo, Norway in the last few hours is something that has never happened in the entire history of the NATO alliance. Something that left Washington completely silent with no official response. Something that a Danish journalist triggered with a single question that Carney answered with 6 words that are already being called the most consequential statement any Allied leader has made in a generation. And those 6 words were, "We will back that with measures as necessary." A Canadian Prime Minister just told the world that Canada is prepared to use military force to defend Greenland against the United States of America. And before we go any deeper into what that means, what led to this moment, and why every single American should be paying attention to what is happening in Norway right now, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell, because this story is developing by the hour. And what we are watching unfold in real time is not just a trade war anymore. It is a fundamental reshaping of the Western world order, and you do not want to miss a single update. So let us go back to the beginning, because this moment did not arrive out of nowhere, and you need to understand the full architecture of what has been built over the last 14 months to appreciate how extraordinary today actually is. When Donald Trump returned to the White House in January 2025, he made a decision that every American president before him, Democrat or Republican, had avoided for 80 years. He decided that America's closest allies were not partners to be respected, but leveraged to be exploited, and he started with the 2 most defenseless targets on his list, Canada and Greenland, countries that had built their entire security and economic frameworks around trust in the United States and had no obvious way to resist American pressure from inside that framework. He called Canada the 51st state and posted altered maps on social media, showing Canada absorbed into the United States with an American flag stretched across the entire continent, including Canadian territory. He called Prime Minister Trudeau Governor Trudeau, as though the elected leader of a G7 nation were a mid-level American bureaucrat. He slapped 25% tariffs on Canadian goods, raised them to 35%, then to 45%, after a television advertisement featuring Ronald Reagan arguing for free trade made him so angry during the World Series that he added another 10% on top in what can only be described as a policy driven by personal offense rather than economic strategy. And then he turned to Greenland, a semi-autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, home to 56,000 people, and he told the world that the United States needed to take it, possibly by force, for national security reasons. He posted maps showing Greenland as American territory. His son, Donald Trump Jr., flew to Greenland in a display of territorial ambition so transparent that Danish officials described it as a provocation. And Trump told Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen to her face that her country's sovereignty over its own territory was negotiable. What Trump did not account for was Mark Carney. Carney won a landslide Canadian election in April 2025 on a platform built entirely around standing up to Donald Trump. His slogan was "Elbows Up," a hockey term that means you are ready to fight and you are protecting yourself. And the Canadian people gave him a mandate so decisive that it surprised even his own campaign's internal projections, because Canadians had watched what was happening and decided that the moment required someone who understood power at its deepest level. And Mark Carney is a man who spent 13 years as a central banker, governing the Bank of Canada through the 2008 financial crisis and the Bank of England through Brexit, sitting across tables from the most powerful financial institutions on earth and never once blinking. He did not respond to Trump's aggression with aggression. He responded with geometry. And today in Oslo, that geometry became a coalition. Here is what actually happened today, because every detail of this story is cinematic and the details matter enormously. Carney arrived in Norway on Friday, not for a diplomatic meeting, but for something far more powerful visually and symbolically. He went to Bardufoss, a Norwegian military base located above the Arctic Circle in the high north, where the landscape is frozen tundra and the sky is perpetually gray in March. And he stood there in the cold alongside Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, watching 32,000 troops from 14 nations conduct NATO's cold response exercise, the largest military training operation in the high Arctic, testing infantry, naval, and air combat capabilities in extreme winter conditions against a simulated Russian adversary. Think about that image for a moment. The Prime Minister of Canada standing on Arctic soil above the Arctic Circle, watching 32,000 NATO soldiers train for war, standing next to the leaders of Norway and Germany, with American troops participating in those same exercises below him on that frozen ground, while back in Washington, the president they all serve under was calling Carney a governor and posting maps of a continent he wants to absorb. That image was not accidental, it was choreographed, it was a message, and the message was received. And then on Sunday today, Carney walked into Government House in Oslo, the official residence of the Norwegian Prime Minister, a building of classical Nordic architecture overlooking the city. And he sat down at a table with the Prime Ministers of Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and Iceland, 5 sovereign nations, all of them democracies, all of them NATO members, all of them experiencing the same pressure from the same source. And together, they produced a joint statement that used a phrase no allied government has used publicly about the United States in the modern era. Economic coercion technology and international trade are increasingly used as a coercive tool. Those are the exact words in the joint statement signed by 6 governments today, and there is only one country on earth that is currently using technology and international trade as a coercive tool against all 6 of those countries simultaneously. And it is not Russia, and it is not China. And everybody in that room and everybody reading that statement knows exactly who it describes. Drop a comment below right now and tell me whether you think the United States is losing its allies or whether this is just politics, because what is happening in that room in Oslo is the kind of thing that gets studied in international relations programs for the next 50 years. And I want to know what you think is really going on. After the meeting, the leaders held a joint press conference, and that is where the moment happened that will define this day in history. A Danish journalist, understanding the weight of what she was about to ask, stood up and asked Carney directly whether Canada would commit troops to defend Greenland. If another NATO ally, her words were carefully chosen, tried to seize the territory, the reference to the United States being unmistakable and deliberate and understood by every person in that room, Carney did not hesitate. He did not look at his notes. He did not hedge. He looked directly at the camera and said, "We stand foursquare behind the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity. It is for the people of Greenland and Denmark to decide their futures. We will back that with measures as necessary," as a partner, 6 words. "We will back that with measures as necessary," delivered by the Prime Minister of Canada at a press conference in Oslo with 5 allied leaders seated beside him. And what those 6 words mean in plain language is that Canada is prepared to use military force to prevent any country, including the United States of America, from seizing the sovereign territory of a NATO ally. That sentence has never been said before by any Canadian Prime Minister in the history of the alliance, and it was said today. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, who has been under extraordinary personal and national pressure since Trump began threatening Greenland, turned to Carney at the press conference and said something that tells you exactly how much this moment meant. She said, "The speech you gave in Davos, I have never experienced anything like this. I do not think I have ever heard so many reflections on a speech from a colleague as I have heard about your speech." And then she said, "We have had a totally unacceptable pressure from the United States and the United States president. It has been very difficult for the people in Greenland to experience this, and I am very grateful from the bottom of my heart for all the help we have received." The Prime Minister of Denmark thanked the Prime Minister of Canada from the bottom of her heart for helping defend her country's sovereignty against the President of the United States, and she said it publicly, on camera, with 5 other heads of government seated beside her. And then Frederiksen said the thing that every American who is watching this story needs to hear. She said, "The old world order is gone and likely not coming back. So we have to build something new, and it has to be a world order that is built on the values that we represent. The old world order is gone and likely not coming back." That is the Prime Minister of Denmark, one of America's oldest NATO allies, a country that has stood beside the United States since the alliance was founded in 1949, saying out loud in public that the world America built after World War II is over, and that the countries of Europe and North America are going to build something new without waiting for Washington to lead it. Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre put it in language that is even harder to dismiss. He said these are not simply words in school books. This is the hardcore reality of how we preserve freedom and democracy. And he was talking about sovereignty and territorial integrity, the same principles Trump has threatened in Canada and Greenland and Ukraine simultaneously. Here is what this means for you as an American and why you should care deeply about what happened in Oslo today, even if you have never thought about Arctic security in your life. 70% of Canada's defense spending currently goes to American companies, American weapon systems, American technology, and American contractors. And today in Oslo, Mark Carney said publicly that he wants to reduce that dependency on the Americans by seeking new international partners to expand Canada's military-industrial complex. 70% of Canadian defense dollars flowing to American defense companies, flowing to Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and General Dynamics and Northrop Grumman and the hundreds of subcontractors who supply them, and a Canadian Prime Minister who just stood in Oslo and said he is actively working to redirect that money toward Norway, Sweden, Germany, and other allied nations who have not threatened to annex his country. Canada has already put its $27 billion F-35 contract with Lockheed Martin under formal review, with Sweden's Saab offering to build Gripen jets inside Canada and create 12,600 aerospace jobs at home rather than in Texas. And Canada has joined the European Union's Security Action for Europe Defense Initiative, the program specifically designed to reduce dependence on American security guarantees, making Canada the only non-EU member of a program whose entire purpose is to build a defense architecture that does not require American approval. The coalition that assembled in Oslo today is not a protest movement, and it is not a diplomatic expression of hurt feelings. It is the beginning of a structural realignment of military procurement, economic relationships, and security architecture among some of the wealthiest and most strategically significant democracies on Earth, and it is being built in direct and explicit response to the economic and territorial aggression of the current American administration. Trump posted on Truth Social this week calling Carney a future governor, referring to his vision of Canada as the 51st American state. And while he was typing that post, Mark Carney was standing above the Arctic Circle watching 32,000 NATO troops train, then sitting in Oslo with 5 allied prime ministers signing a joint statement calling American trade policy economic coercion, then telling the world that Canada will back Greenland's sovereignty with measures as necessary. Washington has not responded to what happened in Oslo today, and that silence is the loudest answer of all. If this video opened your eyes to something that the mainstream coverage of the trade war is missing, do me a favor right now and share it with someone who needs to hear the full story. Because what is happening between Canada and the United States right now is not just about tariffs, and it is not just about lumber and potatoes and aluminum. It is about whether the alliance that won World War II and built the modern world is going to survive the pressure being put on it. And the answer to that question is being written right now in Oslo, Norway, one joint statement, one press conference, and one 6-word sentence at a time. We will be right here covering every development as it happens. Stay tuned and stay informed.